So we are in our second week of the I'm In series. Do you have a friend that asks you to do something and no matter what they say, you're like, yeah, I'm in? Well, this is what this series is all about. What does it take for us to say, yeah, I'm in with Jesus? We're going to look at some people in the Bible that were out and then their transition to being in. So let's start. So if I met you growing up, what would have you been like? Were you that good kid? Were you that kid that knew all the rules, followed the rules to a T? Did their parents love you and your teachers love you because you got the gold stickers, you got the gold stars and all these different things? Or were you the bad kid? You just couldn't help yourself. Maybe you knew all the rules, but you just liked breaking them because they were a ton of fun. I was the bad kid, all right? By grade 5, I had gotten into a ton of fights with girls and with guys. I broke into a house, I stole a bunch of things, and even my grade 5 teacher was telling other parents to get their kids to stay away from me. I was labeled as the social misfit. And it became very clear to me the two types of people in this world. And there's two groups. One is the rule breakers and the rule keepers. Now the rule keepers, right, they don't go over the speed limit. They come back when curfew's coming up. And they don't cause a kerfuffle. People like them. They don't want to cause any sort of conflict. But then you got the rule breakers, right? So the rule breakers, they walk past an alarm, like a fire alarm, and every time they walk past it, they see it, and the fire alarm just like screams out to them, pull me, pull me. And you know, it's like, yes, I want to pull you, but maybe not today. Maybe someday I'll pull you, right? These rule breakers, they will break curfew just because they want to break curfew. And sometimes these rule breakers, they'll just dress weird because they want to let everyone know that I see the rules, I understand the rules, but I'm not following them. And the funny thing about these two groups of people is that they're both fixated on the rules. You're thinking, what? What do you mean they're both fixated on the rules? Well, think about even the rule breakers. How do you think they get their inspiration? How do you think they break the rules so extravagantly? Because they look at the rules and they figure out how to break them to be different. Now, breaking the rules doesn't make you a bad person. But keeping the rules doesn't necessarily make you a good person, doesn't necessarily mean you're boring either. But sometimes when we get fixated on the rule, sometimes we just follow the rule because it's the rule. We don't understand the intention behind it. But if we break the rule, sometimes we miss out on the benefit that we have towards it. So we got to think deeper about these rules. So it's easy to get bent out of shape about the rules in church, right? And we always compare ourselves to people in church. So you see these people that are in with Jesus and you see the people that are out with Jesus. And maybe you don't know what it takes to be in with Jesus or out with Jesus, but you have a sense of where you fit. And the problem is when we get fixated on these rules, we start to think that a relationship with Jesus is about doing this. If I'm going to be in with Jesus, I got to make sure I don't do this or this or this. But hey, if I'm out with Jesus, I guess I can do this and these other things, right? And so rules aren't necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes they can not be helpful. For example, you decide to be a rule keeper, right, in your faith. And you're doing all these things properly. All of a sudden, you can have this sense of pride that you're better than other people. Then all of a sudden, you can start ignoring people because they're not in anymore. You're in and they're in the out crowd. And all of a sudden, they're not worth your time anymore. And maybe the worst thing of all is maybe you think that your whole faith and relationship with God is about performance. Maybe you think that, God will only love you if you live perfectly. God will only give you His favor. God will only draw close to you when you're living properly. And that's just not true. See, what if I told you that being so focused on the rules and keeping those rules can actually be bad for you in the sense you could miss out on some of the most important relationships with people and with God? So we're going to talk about a guy in the Bible named James. Now, James grew up around Jesus' time, and he grew up in a devout Jewish family. If any of you guys know any conservative Jewish people, you know that they're all about the rules, so they're very familiar with the rules. In fact, they have 613 religious commandments. Okay, this is not just the commandments that they follow from the government or like the house rules, like make sure you put the seat back down after you take a pee sort of rule. No, these are 613 religious commandments. This family were rule keepers. But something I didn't tell you about James is he's actually the younger brother of Jesus. And you're probably thinking, that's pretty cool. I wouldn't mind being a sibling of Jesus. Probably have some perks. Well, Maybe not. Think about it. If your sibling came up to you and was like, hey, I'm God's gift to the world. I'm chosen to bring peace into all mankind, and you have to worship me. How would you feel? Would you believe that they're the chosen one of God? Probably not. and James didn't either. And it wasn't just because James grew up with Jesus, because Jesus wasn't following the rules. He wasn't doing the right things. And he figured, what's going on, Jesus? You're a good guy, but you're not following the rules like you should be. And Jesus was so cool because he wasn't afraid of being guilty of association. You know what guilty association means? It means that if you're seen with people that are uncool or whatever, that you're okay with that. You're okay with being seen with whomever, right? And that's what Jesus was like. So he hung out with the prostitutes, he hung out with the thieves, he hung out with the most hated people of that time, which were the tax collectors, because they oppressed their own people. And Jesus was saying, listen, this message of hope, love, is not just for the rule keepers, but it's for the rule breakers too. And I want everyone to know about this love and hope in the living God. And so that's what's so incredible about Jesus. But you can imagine James looking at Jesus, thinking he's a Messiah, and going like, Jesus, you're cray-cray. I don't believe you. It's because Jesus wasn't fit in this nice little, Christian Jewish box or whatever. Jesus was different. And then something happened. Something terrible happened, and then something incredible happened. Well, the terrible thing was Jesus was murdered. He was innocent. But the incredible thing was he didn't stay dead. That on the third day that he rose again. And even today, we still celebrate Easter because of it. Do you know that there's tons of scholars for years and years have tried to figure out this whole Christian thing? How did a Christian religion come out of Jerusalem? The culture was so not right for it. This culture didn't value women, didn't value children, didn't value forgiveness, didn't value grace. Yet here Christians came up and had these very intense values. And you see, they have all these theories, but none of these theories hold any weight. The only thing that makes sense is that Jesus died and that he rose again, and he publicly appeared to his disciples, so much so that his disciples died for their faith. Would you die for a lie? I don't think so. And so it was this fact that Jesus resurrected from the grave and showed himself that made James go from being all out to being all in. So James would talk to people about Jesus, and he would talk to the Jews about Jesus, and then something happened. The Jews started believing in Jesus. And then some other disciples, they started telling non-Jewish people about Jesus. They're called the Gentiles. They started telling the Gentiles about Jesus, and guess what? They started believing Jesus. And all of a sudden, you have these two groups of people, and they come into conflict. And so they were like, wait a minute, don't you need to be Jewish in order to be Christian? Don't you need to have these 613 rules to also be a Christian? And so they got in such a conflict over it, they went to Jerusalem and had what was called the Jerusalem Council to figure out, do you need these rules to be a Christian? And so one side, you had the Jewish people saying, yes, you have to become a Jew and to become a Christian. And then the other side was saying, hey, look, you might have some good rules, but you don't need those rules in order to become a Christian. And so guess what James says? Guess which side he ends up on? Well, let's look into Scripture to see what he says. It's Acts 15, verse 9. And this is what James is saying to the group of people there. It says, and so my judgment is that we would not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. You see, James figured out something really profound, that rules don't have a pulse. Rules don't have a heartbeat. Rules don't have the power of life and death. Rules don't have the power to save you. Rules don't have the power to show grace and love and hope to a bunch of people with broken lives. You know what it is? Relationships. You see, when we focus on the rules and we elevate rules to the very most important thing, then people will only become second best. If we say that rules are the most important thing, then people will never be the most important thing. And this is what we see in James. This is what we see in Jesus' life. It's safe to say that relationships are better than rules. Well, this is what we have to do. We can't allow the rules to keep us out. We can't think that, hey, I got to follow all these rules in order to be in. No. Some of you think that. Some of you think that in order to be a Christian, you have to follow all the right things and do all the right things. Or maybe some of you think that, hey, I want to do the right things, but I just don't feel worthy enough. I feel like if I try, I'm just going to fail anyway. So why would I even try? And so to you, God would say this, that God is more interested in a relationship with you than having perfect behavior. God is more interested in you and your brokenness and your faults and your failures, and having that relationship with you than not having one at all. He's more interested in having a relationship with a son and a daughter than not. And for some of you that are rule keepers, don't let rules count other people out. Man, it's easy to judge other people. They're not following the rules, they're not doing the right things. Then all of a sudden we start ignoring them. And we start thinking, oh, they're too far gone for God. They'll never be a Christian. And we stop praying for them. We stop interceding for them. And we think they're not worth our time because they're obviously not worth God's time. And that's the exact opposite of what Jesus did. Let's be like Jesus. Let's hang out with those that are in the out, and so we can bring them in. So when Jesus came, he said, I'm going to bring life and life abundantly. And that's pretty good incentive to follow the rules. See, the rules are in place not just to be followed, because when you break the rules, something happens. It's not God's best for you. See, when you break the rules, it robs you of experiences, of relationships, and it steals some of the great things that could be going on in your life. And Christ is saying, don't do those things because they're not helpful. And ultimately, those things could draw you away from me, so just don't do that. And when we take these rules all of a sudden and then elevate them so high, it's easy to start ignoring people and relationships. We should put rules in their proper place. Jesus came and hung out with the worst of the worst, and he died for the rule keepers and the rule breakers. So if you're a rule breaker, know this, that God is reaching out to you right now and saying, listen, you don't need to be perfect. Stop resisting me. Come to me, trust me, allow me into your heart, and you will see how good I am. And stop resisting and thinking that you need to be perfect to get to know me. No, I'd rather have you than not have you at all. And for those of you that are the rule keepers, well, let's be like Jesus. Let's be known for our outrageous love and not for our rules. Let's be like Jesus. We'll see you later.